Oh my goodness. Next to last class, though. That's so crazy. How did this happen? All right. Um, I don't know if I have any big updates for you. I think I'm fairly caught up on grading. So if there's something that you've submitted recently that you don't think I've graded, let me know. Somebody emailed me yesterday. It made me laugh, I'm not gonna lie. Like, how do I check my grade? It's like, well, doesn't matter at this point. That was not my official answer, by the way. And I don't know. Um, because my Blackboard looks different. So I told him I think that you go to your class and then tools, and then the grade book is in the tools section. Mine shows up differently, but yeah, it's like, can I check my grade? It's like, you probably should. So if you guys haven't checked your grades yet this semester, why don't you go ahead and do that just to make sure that everything, I'm sorry, it's really not funny, but everything that you turned in has been graded and recorded, that sort of thing. Um, some people were asking me about extra credit, and they said, main tab that says grades, okay. Um, they said that I didn't tell you guys that there's an extra credit assignment, so they didn't know. And if I just put it on there and don't tell you, it's like, oh my. So I don't know. I assume that when I make an announcement that you get an email for it. But I know sometimes you don't check the ACC email. But if I were you, next class, I would. All right, I'll stop talking about stuff like that. And I've tried to explain the grade thing, but I still keep getting questions. But I think it's just because it's pretty real this week. So 210 gets you a C, 210 total. 240 gets you a B. 270 plus the book review gets you an A. No matter how many points you get on the book review, as long as you get some points. And a point total of 270, you're good. Yeah, sorry about your internet. That mine keeps kind of going in and out as well. So if I end up not here for a while, I'll try to get back on. Um, and if you turn stuff in early, the weekly questions that are due Friday, and I gave you feedback and you didn't like your grade, you can go back and turn those back in before Friday. Um, and I think that's really about it that I have to say about grades. Oh, the other thing. My grades don't go in directly from the Blackboard site. So sometimes people get frustrated because there really are more than 200 or 300 points available in the class. I think by the time we're done with all the stuff, there'll be like 330 points available. So your grade isn't figured out of 330. And if a percentage shows up, that's not the thing that goes forward. I'm really basing your grade on 300 points. And it doesn't go directly from Blackboard. So I will put it in, okay? So hopefully everything's good and you're calm. And yeah, it's been a long semester for you, though. I appreciate you guys hanging in there. All right, let's talk about history stuff. Let me see. I know I have the notes handy, but I don't think I opened the weekly questions. Sorry for yawning at you in such a big way. So let me open the weekly questions because some of you have submitted weekly question number whichever, the last one, and talked a little bit more about the accomplishments of the presidency, but you know, it's not the end of the world. All right, so the weekly question for this week, officially, compare Barack Obama and Donald Trump's presidential campaigns. And I've highlighted the presidential campaign part. So you can kind of just stick with what they promised, how they ran their campaigns, that sort of thing. Describe their similarities and differences. I think the differences will probably be really easy for you in some ways, but certainly similarities. And this one, there probably won't be as many specific details in this answer, but excuse me, I'm not crying, there's allergies. Sorry. Oh my goodness. I raked leaves this weekend. It was such a bad idea. Um, oh gosh. Sorry. I'm so glad I'm recording this. Um, so presidential campaigns, I think there's some statistics in there about how much money they raised online, that sort of thing. So feel free to quote those statistics, but I think in general, you're just going to talk about how they ran their campaigns, maybe the types of people they had helping them with their campaigns. Both of these folks had lots of women, several non-traditional types of political people. Neither one of these guys had a huge amount of political experience, although clearly Obama had more. They both, in many ways, said that they were outsiders, and which is true and not true, of course. You know, it depends on how you define outsider. And what else would we want to say about them? They both said they were going to bring change of some sort, either hope and change, or they're going to drain the swamp. So either way, it was going to be change. So and you know, that also explains that really odd, no offense if you're among that group, cross section of folks who voted for both Trump and Obama, which I think is fascinating, but I suppose isn't that much of a mystery because, you know, a lot of people think the political system's broken. So you want to vote for the person who you think is most likely to change the system. So maybe, I don't know, was my guess. All right. But yeah, I don't see, you know, it's interesting because there's not a whole lot of similarities between the two people, Obama and Trump. But I think what you notice if you look at some of the trends, which is kind of what happens in this last chapter, is that lots of the tendencies in modern life and political life really don't change dramatically through the Bush, Obama, and Trump administration. Some of them do, I get that. Some of them don't. Oh, and I wore a Christmas shirt today. You can't even see it, as Santa. I was trying to be festive, but just trust me. All right. Let me share the notes because that's way more important, right? Oh, on the George W. Bush question, oh, goodness. The second one, the protect and defend and not conquer, and that question. I would talk about stuff that happens before the Bush administration as well. Because if you just talk about the Bush administration, I don't think his goal was to predict. I mean, he was just saying that in general, the United States is a beautiful and kind and magnanimous nation. I know some of you are like, no. Well, sometimes, I mean, don't be like that. But you can be like that. I'm sorry. But, you know, his point was we don't really take over the neighbors the way, you know, evil communists had in the past or, you know, some other countries. But we certainly do dominate countries in our own special ways. But, I mean, there were certainly things that you could find in the last 3 or 4 presidencies where we really were just doing altruistic things. That does happen. Don't be so cynical. All right, let's talk about Bush and Gore. I don't know if you were around or paying much attention during the Bush-Gore election in 2000, but it was unusual. And if you were around for that, you're probably not nearly as distressed about the vote counts in this one. Although, because I have some friends, it's like, when is this election going to be over? It's like, you know, it's really kind of over. No offense if you're still hoping for a change in the eventual outcome. I wouldn't count on it just because, I mean, the Bush-Gore election was a little more iffy because it was going to be going to be an easier problem to solve because it's all in one state. And the problem was more easily defined. So it was going to be more easily solved. Everybody agreed that there was a problem in 2000. So they needed to recount the votes in Florida. This is the closest election in history, 2000, popular vote-wise. Less than 0.5%. And it's going to come down to Florida and essentially a county or two in Florida. And they were still using the punch card votes. And so some of the little holes didn't get all the way punched through. So they had different standards about how they were counting the votes, and they were recounted more than once. And we've seen this happen, several times in U.S. history. I'm not saying that it's good or normal or anything like that. Typically, we know, pretty well somebody won by quite a bit, and there weren't too many scandals. But we've had 5 or 6 elections in our history where they've been kind of messy. So this one really messy. So state courts, both sides took. I think the Gore administration started with the first lawsuit, and then of course they're responded to by the Bush group. So back and forth until they eventually decided that the Supreme Court decided to take the case in 2000, and they took it very quickly, which is unusual for them. It usually is a several-year process, but we didn't have several years on this one. And if you have a problem with something related to the executive branch, the Supreme Court is your first court to go to, not the last. So they went directly to this, very quickly to the Supreme Court. They did start in state court. And it goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, in this election alone, we are making the decision. So their goal was not really to set a precedent that in unusual elections, the Supreme Court makes the decision. I surely would not expect the current Supreme Court to take any appeals over the election. I mean, I know, who knows, anything can happen, right? But in this election, they decided that the most current recount was enough, and that Bush would be declared the election, and then people said he was selected, not elected. It was fairly controversial, and we weren't very well unified, and then 9/11, and then we sort of forget about this. And I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember where you were on 9/11. I had a friend that posted, because that November 23rd for my dad's generation is where were you when President Kennedy was shot? And so I had a friend email me and ask me where I was. And I went, that's more of a theological question because I wasn't born yet. And it's funny because she's the same age as I am. I was like, come on, Christy, you know better. But I asked my dad, I was like, Dad, where were you? Because I knew my dad lived in Dallas. And he said they had just gone to the homeland, to the Ozarks, to visit the family, and were driving back when they heard it on the news. And they thought, well, that's just the dumbest practical joke I ever heard. And of course, by the time they got home, it was, clearly not a joke. So. But everybody alive remembers where they were that day. And then maybe 9/11, maybe for your generation. I was teaching high school, and we got an email from our superintendent that said, don't discuss the news with your students. It's like, I teach 11th grade U.S. history. How am I not going to discuss the news with my students? So, we talked about it, and some of them had family in New York, and it was pretty, it's traumatic. All right. But before 9/11, Bush says, you know what, the economy's crap. It was a little sluggish. And so he starts with the largest tax cut in U.S. history, and hoping to stimulate the economy. And who knows, maybe it worked, maybe it didn't, but that's a sign that he was going to follow a more Ronald Reagan sort of economic program with that supply side economics. For your quick refresher, the idea of supply side economics is if you return more money to the people, they will spend it, invest it more, it will produce more income, and then they'll get more money and the government will get more money as well. Sometimes it's called trickle down economics because the thought is people at the top spend more and then that money trickles down to every other class of people, socioeconomic class of people in the country. And I suppose if you're at the bottom, you're going, trickle is right. But, and, I think it's hard. I'm not an economist. I'm just not. And I know, like at the high school I taught at, there was just one economics teacher pretty much, and then he sort of was the tutor of all the other ones who were all coaches. So they all pretty much taught what he taught, and he was extremely conservative. So I don't think they taught any other economic theories other than trickle down and budgeting with Dave Ramsey, which is kind of an interesting economics course. But not, you know, some people think that trickle-down economics is the way to go, or excuse me, supply-side economics or Reaganomics. Other people think that, you know, providing a standard national income for everyone, a base income. And you saw, I mean, you've had this class, you were here, you saw that as far back as the New Deal, we were talking about supplying or providing a national base income for everybody. So that's not as new a thought as Andrew Yang wants you to think it is. And I shouldn't say that. I don't think Andrew Yang wants you to think it's his new idea, but it isn't that new of an idea. But there are definitely different theories of economics and how things would work better for the average person. And who knows? All right, I don't know. But what I do know is the biggest tax cut in history with George Bush, start to see some economic improvement, and then 9/11. And if you're not very familiar with 9/11, I assume that you are, but there were 19 hijackers, 4 planes, 2 in the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, 1 headed to the Pentagon and 1 headed to the White House. And the one headed to the White House is the one where the passengers got word of what was going on, so they hijacked the plane and crashed it into the ground. So, but super tragic day. I think there were 19 hijackers, all of whom had come into the United States, many of whom had gone to flight schools to learn how to fly a plane, at least a little. And I think almost all of them were from Saudi Arabia. So the reaction to 9/11 was pretty extreme, I suppose, pretty harsh, but not, you know, not World War II, let's create relocation or internment camps kind of harsh, but, you know, it did. In some cities, there was some backlash to folks who were Arabic or Muslim. Most of the country, I think, was, you know, it wasn't as bad. It wasn't World War II-ish, but our government reaction is a declaration of war on terror rather than a country. And then some explanation of who's involved in terror. And then we, of course, end up sending troops to Afghanistan and Iraq and in search of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, WMD, which they weren't able to find, although you could read news reports later that suggested they were moved to outlying countries. I think they found, I can't remember what I read, but maybe Syria or other countries nearby. But I think we knew, and the book will confirm this if you need the history book to confirm it, that Saddam Hussein was a terrible person. So I don't think there's anybody in the world, except maybe Saddam's family, but probably not, who will go back and say, like, you know, it's really a mistake to get rid of him. A lot of people are going to argue how we went about it, you know, whether that was the right way or the wrong way. But here's some specific things that will help you as you prepare for the weekly quiz, which hopefully, if I said it right, will be available tomorrow. I know, it's always kind of a crapshoot, but you know, when you start to take it, if it's not there, send me an email and I will look. I think tomorrow is a grading day for me, for my other job. You guys haven't turned a lot of stuff in. All right, Bush Doctrine, you got to know what that is. And that's the doctrine of preemptive war. So you don't really want to wait till they hijack some planes and crash into stuff again, or until someone else attacks you. If you know they're going to attack you, stop it before it starts. So this is a doctrine that justifies preemptive war as a legitimate part of a national security strategy. And that's a new thing, for sure. And of course, that's going to be iffy because, you know, if we'd had this doctrine during the Cold War, who knows if we would have nuked, you know, Cuba without at least announcing it on television before we decided to do it. But, you know, it's a different era. We have different technology. So the thought is we can do this in a more, I don't know, that's safe, is responsible, maybe, responsible way. We also passed the Patriot Act, and I promised you that I would put the definition of patriot in here. So I did. Now, this is just on my copy of the notes. I can go back and put it in your copy of the notes if I remember, but I probably won't. But maybe I will. I don't know. Patriot Act empowers law enforcement agencies to wiretap and spy on citizens without their knowledge. Now, I looked at the US government website, and it talks about how this protects freedom and, you know, how all the misinformation and misunderstandings about it. So maybe you have some misunderstandings or misinformation, I don't know. But it actually stands for stuff. It's an acronym. And I'm always impressed at how hard people must have worked to think of this stuff. But it's USA Patriot Act, uniting and strengthening America by providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism. There you go. So they don't need warrants to look at stuff, or they can get warrants from FISA courts, from non-public courts. I don't know that you want to call them secret courts, but they, you know, you don't have a public grand jury, that sort of thing. And they don't have to tell you that they are looking through your stuff. So they can bypass, I don't know if that's the right word, some of the Fourth Amendment protections, and Fourth Amendment especially, but the idea that you know what you're being charged with, or you know what they're looking for, and that they have to have a warrant or probable cause to look at your stuff. Now, they would argue and that there would be some sort of probable cause, but the standard for probable cause is definitely going to change after 9/11. And the Patriot Act's been renewed, I know, at least once, maybe twice. So, and they're also going to create a Homeland Security Administration. You're probably familiar with them. Who might tighten up the borders, and we see them at airports. I do vaguely remember, I don't travel as much as maybe, I don't know how much the average person travels, but when I do travel, I just drive to the homeland, because are there any air flights into the Ozarks? No, of course not. So I just drive to go see the relatives usually. But once a year, I would fly to go grade AP exams because, you know, you got to work. So I remember that year when I flew to grade AP exams and I went to the airport, it's like, hey, there's guys with machine guns here at the airport. And I'm pretty sure, well, I know some of you are in the military, you go like, Serna, those were not machine guns. I don't know. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. I don't know, maybe they were. But, you know, guys in fatigues with guns at the airport were an unusual sight, I thought, in the United States. And that lasted for about a year, I think. And I know that that's a common sight in some other countries. We're just not used to it here, I suppose. But the people at the air, you know, you've probably flown, and they check for all kinds of stuff, and you can't have, yeah, they check your shoes, because there was that guy that put explosives on the bottom of his shoes. He ruined that for us. And you can't have over a certain amount of liquid because they're liquid explosives, and there's all kinds of stuff that you could carry on, knives and things. You know, people used to regularly carry their whatever pocket knives or whatever that you would have. I don't typically carry a knife either, but you guys are probably shocked by all these things. But our travel life changed quite a bit, and the idea was that we wanted to prevent future attacks. And this emphasis on protecting the homeland really kind of made the Bush administration look a little bad during Hurricane Katrina, because it seemed like there was a general lack of preparedness and response to Hurricane Katrina. And you may remember that. I know we had a bunch of evacuees in our schools, so we had to cancel school for a while, which was heartbreaking to the students, I'm sure. But what really was heartbreaking was what we saw on television in New Orleans, where you know, it seemed like the local mayor had not taken any sort of precautions to get people out of town, because it's not, Hurricane Katrina was enormous, and they had several days warning. But for whatever reason, a variety of reasons, and none of them good, the local government, especially in New Orleans, which is below sea level to start with, and, you know, had some trouble with the infrastructure and some governmental corruption where maybe they had misallocated or misspent some of the funds that were supposed to go to dam and levee repair. Excuse me. So what you saw were the poorest neighborhoods, of course, in the most dangerous parts of town. And I don't mean crime-ridden, I mean lowest level, closest to the water, that sort of stuff. Those folks were unable to evacuate. We saw people in the Superdome who got trapped and didn't have food and were sick, and people in nursing homes that didn't get evacuated, and it was tragic. There were rescues going on, people on their rooftops, and it was incredibly tragic. So the local government was unprepared. The state government did not help out the local government, and the federal government did not coordinate any of these efforts. So what we've seen since then is governments coordinating much better because of what a tragic situation this was. And yeah, there's no way around. There was an economic issue after 9/11. There's a big economic issue. Some of it based on 9/11, but also because there was a housing crisis or bubble. And I don't know if you remember anything about this. My guess is, you guys are young enough that you would not have been buying a house during this time period. I remember, because the house I currently live in, my husband and I bought, it was right before this, so like 98 or 99. And, I was a teacher, that's shocking. And my husband worked at an what did he do? It was an auto paint supply store. So when the body shop fixes your car and repaints, he sold Bondo and paint and stuff and mixed the paints. So we both made about the same amount of money, which tells you probably everything you need to know about both of our salaries. So we kind of struggled to buy a house, not gonna lie. And then we had friends who we knew made less money than us and had more kids than us, who also got home loans and bought more expensive houses than we did. And this is why there was a housing crisis, because they'd gotten rid of some of the protections in the Glass-Steagall Act, and your book talks extensively about that. So there a greater ability to give out loans, especially for homes, and there are fewer standards that banks are requiring for those home loans. So they were doing these weird loans where you would get a really high interest rate, but a low payment for 5 years, and then you get a balloon payment. And, the thought is, and a banker can convince you, there's no offense if you work at a bank, but a banker can convince you, it's like, hey, you don't make that much money now, but in 5 years, dang, you're going to blow the top off this thing, and you're going to make so much more money, which you'll have your car paid off, and you'll have so much more free income that this house payment that goes up substantially in 5 years is not going to be a problem for you. And so they made thousands and thousands of those loans. And they were particularly big in this area because Austin, has experienced so much growth in the last 20 or so years. And when those balloon payments came up, which was typically about 5 years after the loan was made, those folks could not make those balloon payments, and they lost their houses. So they defaulted on their loans, and they didn't have any equity in their houses because they really had just been paying interest and not any principal. So, I think probably builders made some money, although sometimes they didn't get paid off. Banks made some money, and banks got bailed out, as the book will definitely remind you of. But the folks who bought the homes became homeless and had to kind of start over. And it does leave some builders in a bad way, especially if they'd started a new subdivision, because the bottom really drops out of the housing market for a few years. It's kind of a mess. It is. So it does cause us we passed some bills both in the Bush and Obama administration to bail out banks and companies that are too big to fail. And it does create a lot of difficulty financially, and it leads to a very, very slow recovery, because really the bottom dropped out of the financial markets in a lot of ways. So the end of the Bush administration is really marked by this really bad economy, and that will extend really throughout most of the Obama administration. I do recognize that there is a recovery, but the book will talk about this a lot as well, that it's kind of an odd recovery where the stock market seems to recover, the housing market seems to recover, but what doesn't seem to happen is people going back to work. So they refer to it as a jobless recovery. Jobless recovery. So you see unemployment rates staying a lot higher than you would expect. And unemployment rates are sometimes not, they don't always reflect people who stop looking for jobs after a certain period of time. So not as many people worked as had before the housing bubble. Okay, Obama gets elected, you probably heard, and the Obama election in 2008, yeah, historic for a variety of reasons. I think there's a, I remember this high school student who thought I was really dumb. Most high school students think you're dumb if you're older. And he was just convinced I was an idiot. So we were talking about Obama being elected, and I said, I don't know if you guys realize this. I didn't know, but Obama was Black. And then he leans over to one of his fellow students like, I told you she was stupid. It's like, no. I mean, the obvious historic thing about Obama being elected is he's the first African-American president. But also historic is his use of technology. And he's kind of your first BlackBerry connected president. And some of you are like, what is BlackBerry? It was a phone that had buttons on it. And I don't know, it was super trendy at the time. I don't know if they still have them. Because I think everyone uses, well, I was going to say everyone uses an iPhone, but then you would be upset if you had like the Android. So sorry. But BlackBerry was, I don't know what BlackBerry was, but it had buttons. I remember that. So his use of social media, electronic communication to raise money, reach new voters. He also got voters who had really kind of flipped over to the Reagan Republican voting patterns. So he'll get some Southern voters, he's going to get some country voters, he's going to get some middle class voters, and still hold the traditionally Democratic states as well. I think Obama, I'm going to say he's sort of the Kennedy of our generation, maybe, because he's younger, he's got the intelligent, attractive wife, nice family, seems like a family man, and was much more so than, the Kennedy, than Kennedy was. Kennedy's image was really good, but, behind the scenes, not so much. And I think Obama was just pretty likable, on the public stage. I know I live in Texas, and I know not everybody liked Obama. And I know some people, said that he was not from the United States. I can remember teaching a class, an ACC class in 2012, as Obama's going for re-election. And his campaign opponent, was Mitt Romney, who is still a senator from Utah, senator from Utah. And a fairly conservative guy, but more of that traditional Republican kind of guy. And I had a student say, I just don't know if I want to vote for the Kenyan Muslim or that cult member. And I went, oh my, we probably need to have it. I said, we don't normally talk about the guys who are running for president, but I think today we're going to maybe clear up some things about the Kenyan Muslim and the cult member. So, okay. But people did accuse President Obama of all kinds of weird things, but most people did not accuse him of all kinds of weird things, and most people were fairly content with him, which is why he gets reelected. Obama's probably main accomplishment, is the Affordable Care Act, which is often referred to as Obamacare. Now, if they name it after you, it's probably important. So what it does is require everyone in the United States to have a health insurance. So you can still have your private health insurance if your company continues to offer it. If not, you can go to the marketplace, I think is where you go to look for insurance. And It's a government-run website, which might have had some problems at the rollout, as I recall. Oh my, someone else was upset about it too. But it got better as time went along, I suppose. And I think what eventually happens is they look at the case or they look at the law. The Supreme Court says that it was not an illegal takeover of part of the economy, and it's been adjusted since then to where, you know, maybe you pay the penalty, maybe you don't. There's a I know at first you paid extra taxes if you had really nice health care, but some of these things have been adjusted over time and will be adjusted again in the very
Professor,
future. Yes.
we can't see the notes.
Oh my goodness.
Sorry. I put it
No,
in the chat, but I don't think you were
I
checking the chat
no,
quite yet.
I didn't.
So
I'm so sorry.
it's okay.
I feel terrible now. Okay, I apologize. I'm so sorry.
It's all good. I didn't
Yeah,
know when
thank
to say something.
no, I appreciate you saying something. Well, crud. Darn. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's why the notes wouldn't show up either. I was looking at the wrong screen. You know, I got up sneezing today. It just hasn't been any better. I probably sneezed out a small part of my brain. Yeah, Romney was from Maryland or Massachusetts or one of those M states in the East. Yep. I thought it was Massachusetts, but I don't know. I should know. I don't know stuff. But thank you for telling me. I'm so sorry. Goodness, have we been going along? It has been a while. Okay. Deep breath. I'll get over it and we'll keep going, right? Okay. Yeah, I was thinking it was Massachusetts, but I don't remember why I thought that. Because I'm not like a big Romney fan. I think he's a fine person. I'm not, except for the dog on the roof. Do you remember? Are you guys old enough to remember the campaign? Apparently, okay, thanks. He thanks for searching. He oh yeah. No, Romney is a pretty devout Mormon kind of dude. But he apparently took a cross-country trip once and they put the dog carrier on the roof of the car. And it was funny, that was all people talked about. It's like, is that really? Like 30 years ago, he didn't treat the dog right. But I remember telling my high school students, I said, this is how you know that President Obama is a masterful politician, because he took probably the most Boy Scoutish guy who ever ran for president in Mitt Romney. I mean, the dude doesn't swear, probably hasn't had caffeine. I mean, he doesn't drink. He's just a super devout family kind of guy. I'm not saying that he's perfect, because nobody is, but you know, he's the guy you would trust to babysit your kids. He's a good guy. And he made him seem like a gangster thug. It's like, you know, if you can do that when you're running a presidential campaign to Mitt Romney, you're pretty good. I mean, and I don't mean that in a like an unkind way about President Obama. And I'm not saying that he did that personally, but his team. I mean, it's pretty masterful to create controversy around Mitt Romney was pretty impressive. I know hedge fund and stuff, but that wasn't really what the controversy was. Okay. All right. Sorry. Notes. I'm so sorry. Okay. Obamacare. So everybody has health insurance now. Oh, the other stuff about Obamacare. The reason people like it, it makes sure that insurance companies cannot, what is the word? Exempt you, disqualify you because of a pre-existing medical condition. And goodness, I know I've mentioned my husband a few times. He died pretty young because he had some fairly complex medical issues. And my goodness, they are not kidding. It was hard to get health insurance. You couldn't get it individually. You know, it had to be a group insurance policy through work, that sort of thing. So this makes it possible for everyone, no matter what their healthcare issues are, to get some sort of health insurance. The reason it required everyone to get it is typically people mostly in your age group, you know, the 20s and 30s, didn't necessarily buy health insurance because nothing can happen to you in your 20s. You never get sick, nothing bad can happen, you are still invincible, so no one buys health insurance in their 20s. And excuse me, that skews the pool of people who buy insurance, it skews the risk pool to people who know they need insurance, which means they use it more often, which makes it, you know, if you get the young people in there, it spreads out the risk. And I know it's like, we don't really need insurance. You might need it for a catastrophic event, and that's kind of the way that it's designed. So spreads out the risk, the pool of risk for insurance. So everybody's got it. So it's cheaper for everyone overall, although I know, you know, having to buy insurance is not cheaper than not buying insurance. Pre-existing conditions. And here's a generational change. Parents were excited because they could keep their kids on their health insurance until they were 26. I'm old, we've discussed this several times, and my parents are like, you're 18, pay for your stuff now. And my parents never paid for anything after I was 18, college, rent, car insurance, whatever it is. My same father, who wouldn't pay for anything for me, pays for his grandkids' cell phones, and they are college graduates. It's like, how is that the same person? How is that the same person? Sorry that I'm complaining about that. But Obamacare says you can stay on your parents' insurance till you're 26. And what the heck? Your parents are good with that. So that is a cultural change for sure. I'm not bitter. I'm not bitter because I know it is kind of hard to make it on your own. So it's nice if you're still on their insurance. I'm not bitter. I'm happy for you. All right. So Obama administration, other stuff. Republicans do denounce it as a government takeover of healthcare. It ends up going to the Supreme Court, where Justice Roberts he is the deciding vote and says, nope, not a government takeover, it's legal, that sort of thing. Obama administration restores and renews relations with Cuba, which have been maybe a little strained in the recent administration, and made a nuclear deal with North Korea, which the Trump administration took us out of. I'm going to be cynical enough about North Korea to say I don't know if it matters, but that's just me being cynical about politics. I'm not saying that you shouldn't try to make a deal with them. You probably should and verify stuff. And oh, the deal, you're wondering, like, what is the deal? For them to not develop nuclear weapons. Because we figure they're kind of a wild card and we'd rather they didn't have nuclear weapons. I think South Korea agrees with us. I'm pretty sure Japan does. The economy improves, but unemployment remains higher than expected through the recovery. So Obama is reelected, and this is unusual. It truly is not that Obama was reelected. I think people get reelected with some regularity, but with the bad economic situation, with unemployment being much higher than people would have expected in what they called the jobless recovery, that was a bit of a surprise. I mean, that one was kind of iffy. But he was personally, I think, so popular that helped him quite a bit. Why are there people in the waiting room? Sorry. They must have gotten kicked out, right? I know that happens. Oh, that reminds me, I should recheck the roll when we leave, before we leave. Okay. And then the book talks about, is that really the end of the notes? How did that happen? Crud. Okay. All right. Random changes in the modern era, and then maybe we'll go back and look at questions or talk about whatever you need to talk about. Okay. Random changes in the modern era. They talk about the pay gap between men and women decreasing slightly. You'll notice that there's the Lilly Ledbetter Equal Pay Act that passes during the Obama administration. I know we talked about this quite a bit in the social studies department I worked at, which was primarily male coaches, because, you know, it was a high school, so that's kind of the way that goes. And they talked about how, you know, this made sense because, you know, the men took on the extra jobs like coaching, and certainly, you know, those guys made more money than I did because they did take on the extra coaching job and stipend. It was like, we have the same job, but I work more hours than you, so I should get more money. It's like, yeah, I don't want to coach football. So you do you, and I'll work part-time at ACC. It just seemed easier to me. Smells better, that sort of thing. Plus, I don't know enough about football. They also argued that women were more likely to leave the workforce, to have those babies because men still don't have babies. And we know statistically that if the kids are sick, it's the mom who's staying home with them instead of the dad. I know some of you are like, hey, I'm the dad and I stay home. I know I'm not. I'm just talking statistics. So women have those gaps in the workforce, so the men would say, well, this is why. And it's like, I don't know if we have options to let the men have the babies. I'm pretty sure we don't. So I don't know. I do know that there are some times that it seems, that, well, all I know is what the statistics suggest. Women are more likely to go to college now than men. Women are more likely to get college degrees than men. Also, what people major in does still differ by people's sex, and that also can explain some of the pay gap. There's certainly more men involved in engineering, more men involved in technical jobs, in computer-related industries. I think the last I read, there were more women who were doctors and lawyers. So, and those jobs I think tend to pay well. And there should be more women as history teachers, except then they don't know anything about weapons. That's a stereotype as well, isn't it? There are some women who know about weapons. So, all right. Yeah, the engineering thing. And I know that, the high school I worked at had women in science and engineering club. And, most of our science teachers were women. But I think that probably helped encourage more people to go into engineering. But there's definitely a push to get more women involved in the STEM industries and STEM studies. And mostly because you'll make more money. And I know back when I was a kid, 100 years ago, and my mom told me the same thing, just to make sure that you were nice and you were really cute and that you were charming and you'll marry a guy that makes a lot of money and he'll take care of you. It's like, it's kind of a crapshoot, no offense, guys. So, and it would be a crapshoot the other way too. I mean, I don't know too many parents that tell their sons just be really nice and charming and, learn how to cook, and maybe a nice woman with a good job will marry you and take care of you. Some of you guys are going like, sounds good to me, except, yeah. So I don't know that there's much of an emphasis on that in the modern era. I think everybody's parents tell them, prepare for something where you'll enjoy your job and be able to pay your bills. I think that's what everybody wants, that combo of enjoying your job and paying your bills and not having to rely on someone else, although it's cool if it works out. You know what I mean? If you can work together, if you've got a roommate or whatever. But, if you can pay your own bills, it gives you a different sort of security. All right, manufacturing jobs, they're not so much in the US. You're aware of this. You also probably noticed, we didn't talk about is Trump. That's what we'll talk about next time. Sorry. I don't have any Trump notes. What the heck? I will make some Trump notes and share those next time. What was I thinking? But manufacturing jobs do continue to leave the United States. Some people are going to blame NAFTA, but I really don't think most of those jobs have moved to Canada and Mexico. Lots in China, and some are leaving China, to other countries nearby where they can pay people even less potentially. So manufacturing shifts out of the United States, and that really has impacted that middle class that used to rely on factory work. Like, I know up where my dad and a couple of my brothers live, there is a big Ford plant where they make trucks. I think it's fleet trucks, and they hire fewer and fewer people all the time. And I have a step brother who was, I don't know what he does at the Ford plant. I think he's more a custodial services kind of person. And because he's old enough, he was there during a union contract. So he made quite a bit of money, honestly, probably more than I do, um, cleaning up on the assembly line of the Ford plant. But as time has gone along and unions are less powerful and more of those jobs have gone overseas, that ability to make a decent living working at the Ford plant, or my brother works at a plastic plant, one of my brothers works at a plastic plant, that ability to have that kind of factory job and still comfortably make a living is not, it's not there. I mean, it's just not, it doesn't happen in the United States. And it doesn't happen overseas either. I'm not suggesting that it does. The manufacturing jobs are going to places where they can pay less than what we would pay in minimum wage. It's not 100% true, but it is mostly. All right, so manufacturing goes out of the United States, which means that it leaves a job deficit, especially kind of in the middle of the country, where all of those manufacturing plants used to be. And all of those states, too, tend to be strong union states. And sometimes the manufacturing just goes to southern states or places where there aren't unions so that they can keep the manufacturing in the United States but still pay less because union jobs tend to pay more. In the United States, healthcare and service jobs become more prominent, so things involved with technology, service jobs. I've certainly had some of those where you worked in a store, customer service kind of thing, or service like fixing things kind of service. But healthcare is a big rising industry, and of course, healthcare for older folks, that's going to be pretty big for the next 20 years because there's a lot of older folks until my generation gets super old, and then my generation is small, so there won't be as many of those jobs. Education, because your generation and the ones slightly older than you had a bunch of kids, so there should be teaching jobs if you want them. But healthcare, service jobs, teaching, anything technology related. And you know what I always talk to my high school students about is, when I first started working, late 80s, early 90s, the assumption was you finished your education and then you go to work. Now the assumption is that your work will always require constant updates to your education. And that's just the truth, even if it's just keeping up with the technology. So the job market changes pretty dramatically during this era. And segregation. We have resegregated ourselves. And I know that we talk about this pretty consistently in local politics, state politics, that sort of thing. Yeah, certifications have to be redone every year. I know when I first started teaching, again, 100 years ago, I have a lifetime teaching certification for English and history. But if you graduate now, you have a certification that has to be renewed every, I don't remember how many years. I have 2 of those kind of certifications as well. And you have to do training and submit it to the state. And not to teach in college because they don't care. You just have to know what you're talking about and have a certain degree in college. But to teach in public school, yeah, we have those certifications as well. And when my husband worked in the auto paint industry, they had certifications which were definitely related to technology and really important because who wants to blow up the warehouse? It's a bad call. But then he taught Spanish last part of his life and got to be certified there as well. Segregation. One of my favorite things to talk to the high school students at the more affluent high school about, because they were just sure, all this stuff was over. It's like, no, it's economic. It really is socioeconomic. I was talking to your friend yesterday about this because they were talking about, how crime statistics are skewed negatively toward people who are Black and brown. I went, hey, we were just kind of talking about that in class. And I said, crime bills in the 80s and 90s. And they go like, yeah, I heard about this. And I went, yeah, it was true. And I said, but the truth is, it's as much about being poor and not poor. Because one of the things I noticed teaching at poorer schools, especially when I taught high school and then not as poor schools, was when the kids would get in trouble, the consequences were much different. Like I remember, maybe my husband and I coached a kid who might have had some marijuana at school. That's kind of frowned upon, in case you're wondering. And he got caught, and he was facing being charged as an adult and possible prison time. And then same school district, another school I taught at later. Yeah, my husband went to to the court with him, and then it ended up being probation, and everything turned out really well. But I mean, this was a poor kid. His family couldn't afford a lawyer, so he got the court appointed one. Family didn't speak English. It was kind of a mess, and without some it was kind of a mess. We'll just go with that. Other side of the same school district, a kid who was at prom and under the influence of some sort of substance, and maybe I had prom duty that year. Dear Lord, that's one of the reasons you shouldn't teach high school, prom duty. But and so I didn't know this kid, but it was very clear that they had been influenced by something other than history and the joy of prom. So I mentioned that to the administrators, the police then talked to her and cited her for something, and then they sent her home with her parents. And eventually her parents got a lawyer who deposed me about whether I had probable cause to suspect that she was under the influence of anything. So they were arguing that I had violated her civil rights by even suggesting that she was under the influence of something. And what eventually happened to that kid was nothing. Yeah, no punishment, because if you got the right lawyer, you get no punishment. And you know what it takes to get the right lawyer is money. Yes. So I don't know, just talk. Segregation there's no doubt that it is disproportionately Black and brown, but that also has to do, it's not the only thing, it has to do with money, because you can live in certain places because you have money. I also know, in that same school where lawyer and all that sort of thing, I do know that when we had kids of color at the school, they did get suspected of things more frequently than they should have. So I know that it's not just about money. I do. And statistics will bear that out as well. But money does help. And money helps in criminal justice. It helps in education, because public education is funded in strange ways, but in your book will point this out, in stranger ways in Texas, but by your property taxes. And I realize we have a recapture Robin Hood kind of thing that redistributes some of the funding. But if you went to high school in Texas, there is a difference between the types of facilities and amenities and opportunities that different high schools in different cities get. And it depends on, where, if you live in a wealthier area, you probably are going to have a better public school. That's just kind of the way that goes. So segregation really resurfaces and continues due to economic issues, housing patterns kind of reinforce those things. It's also why people talk, especially in the Austin area so much, or any urban area, about gentrification, about certain areas that were traditionally lived in by certain groups of folks, and then as Westlake, Westlake's a different place for sure. Yeah, we got to talk about Westlake, but only for like a minute, because I know it's almost time to go. But certain areas in Austin, which were traditionally Hispanic or African American neighborhoods, and as people have gone in and built condos or certain kind of trendy restaurants, the property values go up. And even if your house is paid off, if your taxes, if your annual taxes go up too much, you can't afford to stay there even without a house payment. So lots and lots of folks are being pushed out of areas. It's happening, I don't know if you'd call it gentrification where I live in Leander. Maybe you would. But, even the area where I live at, which, I mentioned, I purchased the house 20 years ago or so. It's more than doubled in value, and it's not fancy at all. So I could not afford to buy this house now, if that makes any sense. So, and there used to be lots of trailers and duplexes and stuff in Leander where people could affordably live, and now I think those folks have to go. You can't even live in Liberty Hill. You got to go to Lampasas now if you're not, fairly well off. By fairly well off, I mean, at least a teaching salary or two. So I don't know, money, it's tricky. Yeah, Westlake, that's a weird place. That's just a weird place. But the Supreme Court, and I know that I mentioned this, had a ruling a couple of years ago. It was Obama administration, where they talked about how unequal education occurs because of the housing patterns, so that the government assisted housing has to be built in neighborhoods that aren't just poor neighborhoods. So you're starting to see more of what they refer to as Section 8 housing near Vandegrift High School, which is the kind of ritzy high school in the Leander ISD area. Not trying to be rude if that's where you went. Oh my gosh, when they were zoning for that school, I remember hearing at the zoning meetings, the parents going, like, we do not want the apartments zoned to our new school. We want the apartment people to go to this high school. It's like the apartment people, it's like a different race of people. But I don't know, some rough stuff. But Westlake, they wouldn't build a second high school because they didn't want to decrease the success of their football team, which is kind of entertaining. But the first ACC class I taught, very first one, I had students from Westlake, and this girl was not doing her own work, we'll just say. And it was very obvious. She copied her book review word for word, word for word. Hers was the one that had the word hagiography in the first paragraph. It's like, yeah, 16-year-old, I know you didn't write that. And her parents went to a lot of trouble to try to get me fired. And I had one other parent, high school parent, do that once. It's like, you guys have lost your minds. But I don't know, if you've got money and a lawyer. All right. And we'll wrap this up, and then we'll talk about Trump next time. And don't leave, because I got to double check the roll. Political divisions remain, winning primary elections. And you know this, if you paid any attention to politics at all. Sometimes you have to be pretty extreme to win the primary, or promise extreme things. And I think you're going to see some issues for the president-elect Biden to deal with that as well. Because if you have backers who are Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and they expect certain things once you get elected, it'll be interesting to see which of those things, you have to deliver on. Because in the general election, everybody, more people vote, and more people are kind of in the middle. In the primary elections, only real partisans tend to vote. Most people don't vote. So the people who are more extreme vote. So we tend to get more extreme nominees who then try to move to the middle in the general election, which upsets some of their supporters. So lots of odd things. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing for now. All right. So next time we'll talk about Trump and the weekly questions and any other things. And I will probably make an announcement about grades today, like what you should check for, what you should look for, that sort of thing. I know I said I was going to stop recording, but I didn't.